Redditors who knew men caught on To Catch a Predator before the show. What were they like? My auntie's boyfriend slit her throat when they broke up. She lived and is fine, luckily, as he called 999 right after he did it. Later, she sold her story to a glossy mag. The intro to the piece stated that no one had any idea and everyone liked him. Absolute nonsense. He was actually banned from all family events. He was extremely strange from day one, and the final straw was him taking pictures of two young girls he didn't know, my cousins, while they were on the trampoline in my uncle's garden, repeatedly asking them to do sit-down jumps. The implication being he was trying to get pictures up their skirts. I feel like in a lot of cases, the no one had any idea could be true. In some cases, though, it's definitely not, and this sounds like one of those cases. This man had crimson red warning signs all over him, but I'm sure the no one knew story probably sells better. I bet the magazine pushed for that. Story 2. I didn't know the person directly, but I worked at a company that had an employee caught on the show. This was particularly problematic, as the company was Nickelodeon Animation. Everyone who knew the guy was actually pretty shocked. It was particularly rough for his girlfriend at the time, as she also worked at the studio, so there was no hiding from it. For their part, Nickelodeon instituted rigorous background checks for every new employee after the incident, with zero tolerance for any misdeeds involving children. Those background checks are what keeps this lore alive, though, as the process is much more intensive than any other studio. Story 3. I knew the cop from Alabama that was arrested on the show. He had guns and rope in his vehicle when he went to meet the girl. Super creepy stuff. When he was a sheriff's deputy in Florida, he would come into my job frequently, so I didn't know him on a personal level, but I did talk to him on a regular basis. He was a really nice, respectful guy, and seemed to be a good cop, too. I was shocked when I saw the episode. You never really know what goes on in someone's bedroom. Story 4. I was roommates with a person on the show for a bit. His name was Dave, and he was one of the few people they let go when they started having the sheriff's deputy waiting outside. Felt bad for the guy. Completely gullible and too nice of a dude. It was the Riverside, California episode where two really young guys show up at the house. Basically, my buddy was out in Cali visiting a friend that told him he needed a detour to drop in on this girl he'd been chatting with. No age was mentioned, and it's not like he could say no, as the only car he had was his friend's in California. So he's like, sure, I'm down to tag along. Immediately regretting the decision when Chris Hansen pops out. They only interviewed his friend. He just had to stand there nervously guzzling a Rockstar waiting for it to be over. Funnily enough, when Chris told them they could go, they thought they were in the clear, and were giggling on the way out, until a bunch of cops in tactical gear jumped them in the driveway. Like I said, they let him go with no issues. He never had contact with the girl and had only been in state for less than 24 hours. Really sucked though, because when the episodes were still available online, that whole episode had his face as the thumbnail. Edit. To be fair, I didn't know him till well after this episode, so not a super fit for the post. Met him at work and became friends. Later was in a situation where I needed a new place to stay, and like I've said earlier, he was a super nice guy. I remember when my now wife and I were hanging out with him, and he says out of the blue, "I've been on TV, wanna see?" and whips out the tape of the episode. My wife and I have been To Catch a Predator fans since it came out, and I always thought Dave looked familiar. We were shocked when it became apparent why. Funny part is when the episode was being filmed, we were living not too far from it in Yorba Linda, California, but didn't meet Dave till probably 5 years later after we moved. For any follow-up requests, I haven't spoken to Dave in probably 10 years or more. As far as I know, Sebastian did actually get charged and convicted. However, he did get much-needed help as well. They were both foster kids together for a long time, and while I don't give passes on child touchers, Sebastian's experience growing up, if I recall correctly, were horrific. As far as I know, Sebastian did actually get charged and convicted. However, he did get much-needed help. They were both foster kids together for a long time, and while I don't give passes on child touchers, Sebastian's experiences growing up, if I recall correctly, were horrific. So I hope he's in a better place now. The last I heard from Dave after we moved apart said he got railroaded to work as a coyote by the local cartel, and his car was being held to make him cooperate. Was a really nice eclipse back in the day. Not sure how much of that is true, but again, this guy wasn't a good liar and super naive. Probably the unluckiest thing that could happen when you're with a buddy, huh? If you're just like, yeah, man, I'll bring you to this girl you've been talking to. How are you supposed to know? And then to end up on the episode, that sucks. Your face as the thumbnail is also just unfortunate. Definitely some 10 seconds of fame that Dave probably didn't want, but he seems kind of proud of it, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Dave was into it. Not into it in that way. You know what I mean. And you know what I didn't mean. Story 5. Yes, Matty Nash. He was creepy and kept trying to get me to go to Burning Man. When I told him I didn't think it was a good idea because I had a 10-year-old kid at the time, he said I should bring my kid. Now, I don't think he was interested in my kid at all, but I did tell him I thought it would be super creepy to bring a kid to Burning Man with a bunch of people on E. This was in 2001. He came over to my house under the guise of talking business and then put the moves on me. I turned him down and sent him home to his wife. Story 6. My dad pulled my brother and I from a fancy, expensive elementary school and put us in public school, despite him really wanting us in a private school. He said after meeting the principal a couple of times, he had a weird feeling, strong enough to override my mom not having felt the same way. We were starting 1st and 3rd grade, had done kindergarten and 2nd grade there, and then switched. 6 years later, the guy was busted for touching a couple of his young students, girls and boys. My dad told me this story years later, right after another strange incident. When he and I were on a train and when we got off, he had us duck around a lot of people in pillars. I didn't get why, but the dude across from us had been absolutely hardcore eyeing me, a 15-year-old dressed for opera girl, and I figured that was regrettably normal. But Dad said, when he's eyeing me too, it's a problem. I trusted my dad about people ever since. Opie's dad has some serious reading people skills. That's impressive. Admittedly, also could have just been luck, but I don't know. I feel like a parent's intuition is pretty strong, although the mom didn't pick up on it. Maybe Opie's dad is just a super empath. Story 7. My husband worked with / was good friends with one of the men on the first ever episode. We were all in our late 20s. He was a highly educated, well-liked guy. He was nice and funny as hell. We were all shocked. He got busted trying to sleep with a 12 or 14-year-old girl. He got a good lawyer. And so To Catch a Predator didn't show the video of him getting busted. Only a photo that he shared in the chat with who he thought was the young girl. We read the chat log between him and the girl, and it was disgusting. He called my husband one time after the show aired to say that this was the first time he ever did anything like this and he got caught up in the taboo nature of it. Never spoke to him again. Story 8. I'm a lawyer. I worked closely on a case with another lawyer who later was caught trying to assault an underage girl who was really a cop. He was married and had kids and was the nicest guy. Very earnest and dedicated to the cause, trying to make the world a better place. There were zero signs he would do anything like that. It was a shock when it came out. It really shows that it could be anyone who does this type of thing. There aren't necessarily signs you would see that would tip you off that your coworker or neighbor or acquaintance is interested in underage girls. I saw a comment on a different video that I narrated for, which basically said the word banging isn't a good substitute when it's talking about an underage person involved, and I agree. As such, as I did in this story, I will be using the word assault anytime that comes up, and it doesn't necessarily always make sense in the context, but look, trying to sleep with someone underage is assault, both by law and just like practically. So yeah, if you're ever confused about why I use the word assault instead of banging, that's why, because I agreed with the comment. Story 9. I don't know anyone from the show, but I was very close to my father, who was a predator. Middle-aged geeky dude. Had 2 daughters. I was 18, my sibling 20 at the time of arrest. A bit socially awkward, but known as a really kind guy. Always generous with his time. Worked at a community center helping underprivileged children learn how to use computers. And it turns out he was inappropriately touching at least 2 girls from there, 4 and 8. And hosting a child content ring from the center's server. No one suspected it. He loved kids, but that's because he had to, right? He'd fix everyone's computers for free and help them get into work. Really great, upstanding citizen. He got 16 years, and everyone else got a lifetime of trust issues and trauma. Story 11. Wasn't on To Catch a Predator, but my ex-stepdad was a child toucher. Before he went to jail for his 3rd time, my mom didn't know when she married him, by the way, we would see his family a lot. His brother was always very nice and liked having us over. They would sometimes get weird with each other, and his brother would make comments about my body every now and then. After my ex-stepdad went to jail, his brother was caught on an online chat sting. He somehow got my contact info when I was an adult and thought it was appropriate to tell me he was attracted to me when I was 12. What the hell, man? Everything else aside, the last part, is there an end goal? What's the thought process? You were contacting this person to tell them you were attracted to them when they were 12. Okay, why? I can't imagine any good reasons at all. In fact, no, there are no good reasons. Weird, man. Yucky. Story 12. My cousin was about 17 at the time, and dating a man in his mid-30s. By the time she was 18, she was giving birth to his kid. Meanwhile, her younger sister was dating a guy her own age. According to this guy, he told the older sister's boyfriend that he was a child toucher, and that he shouldn't be coming around. Well, to make a long story short, the older guy got busted trying to hook up with a 14-year-old, and went to prison for a couple of years. The younger guy, he later assaulted a 12-year-old in the back of a van and also went to prison. He also sold various family members of mine $300 worth of Avon products and never delivered. What a putz. The older sister is Still with the ex-con. Of course she is. I wouldn't expect anything less from my family tree. They had 3 more kids, one of whom probably isn't his, and could have come out black according to her. One was even conceived in my grandmother's driveway as my cousin was banging up against a camper. Why did she tell me that story? I don't know. She was laughing about it, what the hell? But as far as I can tell, she has 4 kids with 2 different guys. Her younger sister has gotten her life back on track and is living responsibly. Just 2 kids with 2 different guys for her. I don't blame people for falling in love with the wrong person the first time around. But their younger sister has 7 kids with 6 different guys. In keeping with tradition, one of them could have come out black, I was told. Her situation is a bit more unique in the fact that one of the fathers was later murdered. I don't know the details of that story. And the 4th younger sister, she has 4 kids and either works at Big Lots or McDonald's. But at least she's with a guy who hasn't left her, and according to his Facebook page is an educated man, having graduated from Juggalo University. My older sister did the math, and she's pretty sure the whole family got $40,000 total in stimulus checks. Edit. The phrase could have come out black is a quote from the oldest sister. I could have done a better job explaining the significance of that. They act as if it's not a big deal to be in the delivery room and not even know whose baby you're about to have. That's the point I'm trying to make. Story 13. Alright, I actually knew a guy who ended up getting caught on To Catch a Predator. We weren't super close or anything, but we took a few classes together and had labs together. To give you some chronological context, I would have met him originally in like 2001 or 2002. It was my senior year in high school, but I was taking a community college physics class. He was 1 year older than me, having just graduated the year earlier. He was born in 83, I was born in 84. I didn't really get to know him very much in that course, but I did in a later course. And that one was around late 2002 or early 2003. I knew him from physics classes and nothing else. I remember we were in the same lab group, so we were spending 3 to 4 hours at a time working on some lab project. He was an immigrant from India and a rather small man. Very thin and fairly short. He was a Sikh and kept his hair covered. His English was pretty good though. You can just sort of tell this guy was the type of guy who had no luck with girls, like 0, which is really common for a lot of dudes at this age. But this was like worst case scenario for a guy. He had no attention from any kind of women, and we were in a physics class. Awkward with girls probably explains the majority of young guys in that class at that time in our lives. One time he wanted to teach me a lesson about never meeting girls online. He told me a story about how his friend, figure similar situation, was trying to meet girls online and then he met this one. She looked a little chubby in her face in her picture, but he went to go meet her at the amusement park and to his horror it was a very obese woman. His friend had no idea how to bail, so he just sort of went along with it. They went and did some rides and then they got on the roller coaster, where when the ride ended, she got stuck and the ride operator was unable to help her, so they had to shut it down, call in a technician who disassembled the ride to get her out. As he was telling me the story, he was laughing harder and harder. He then proceeded to point to an obese woman in the class and whispered to me that it was her. Then he erupted into laughter. The moral was that's why you don't want to meet women online, because you never know what you could get yourself into. I remember the class he told me this joke in, and I remember taking it in spring of 2003, so I would have been like 18 or just turning 19. That was the last class I took with him, but I do recall seeing him in the summer of 2004 at a different school. I was waiting for a ride home in the parking lot for about a minute or two. Basically just said hello, asked what we were doing at the same place, then sort of just left. We were never online buddies, MySpace friends, or did anything in any social context outside of a classroom or lab. No lunch, no party, nothing. He ended up getting busted on To Catch a Predator in January of 2006. I don't recall seeing the episode until 2007 or so. I remember the story he told me about meeting women online. I honestly have the hunch that the Sting was the first person that was ever talking to him intimately. Like, if he said he had never done such a thing, I believe it. The guy was an absolute max-level incel long before the incel movement. I did read the chat log he had with the decoy and it was pretty sick though. The dude was definitely screwed up. If you watched the show, he was the guy who claimed to be into academics and know the law when trying to talk to Chris Hansen. That was definitely the vibe I remember from class. Story 14. Didn't actually know the guy, but one guy showed up to the Sting in a company semi-truck. It's blurred out in the episode, but the company is Covenant Transport. I went to work for them a few years after the episode. During the orientation, they gave us a list of things that will result in immediate termination. Things like driving under the influence, failing a drug screen, impromptu meetings with Chris Hansen. That's a pretty good reason for immediate termination if I've ever heard one. An impromptu meeting with Chris Hansen is probably a good reason to be fired from anywhere. Story 15. Not on the show because we're not American, but there was a group that was looking for people accessing certain sites, and my cousin's ex was one of them. She actually found out by checking his computer, but it was horrifying to her. I was a kid around this time, so what I remember from him is that for the most part he was quiet. One thing is, in our culture, we kiss each other on the cheeks as a greeting, but when I did it I think I missed her or something. I don't remember the exact details, and the whole family laughed lightheartedly. I looked back at him, but there was this weird look in his eyes that I couldn't exactly understand as a kid. It freaked me out immensely, though. I remember kind of running away in a weird embarrassment afterwards, but it's a memory that stuck with me my whole life. A few years ago, my cousin confessed about why they really broke up all those years ago, and I just remember that specific moment and felt so scared like I did as a kid. It's a face I don't think I'll ever forget. Story 16. Actually, a friend of mine's roommate ended up being one. He was super normal and kind of good looking. He had a girlfriend as well. The only odd thing about him was that he had inherited a bunch of money from his family, all in cash. Aside from that, he was in his 20s and you would never think it at all. He was one of the ones that thought he was meeting a 16-year-old girl or something like that, and he also wasn't very bright. Story 17. He wasn't on the show, but went to middle school and part of high school with a guy who went on to assault a 12-year-old girl. We went to school out in the middle of nowhere, so everybody knew everybody. He always seemed normal enough, if a bit quiet. Very tall guy. What I do remember is that he dated another girl in class for several years. The relationship was unusual, since most relationships at that age averaged about 2 weeks. I remember her being very quiet and always seemed to be a bit depressed. They finally broke up when he moved away. Amazingly, she became much more cheerful after that. It was only then that I realized she was cheerful before too, but changed once they started dating. I had my suspicions that something was bad in their relationship, but I never pried. Fast forward years later, and I got the news through the grapevine about what he'd done to some poor girl. Story 18. When I was in high school, I coached a grade 8 boys basketball team with a friend. That friend sometimes would bring 2 other guys to practices and games, either as rides or help during practice. A couple weeks later, the phys ed teacher who was kind of watching over the whole thing told me she didn't want one of those guys at the school anymore, because there were rumors that he was caught putting his arm around girls before practice would start. I had no problems with that, since I didn't really care for the guy and thought how screwed up that was. We were 17 and these girls were 13 or 14. I told my buddy I didn't want to be around that guy ever again as well. Years later, that guy's name comes up in the news, as an underage girl, 12, who was walking at night got a ride from this guy and ended up being assaulted. Makes me sick thinking about it. Story 19. A supervisor at my previous job got busted in a big sting at the end of last year with a bunch of other dudes. He was kind of dumpy in appearance but thought he was hot stuff, both at the job and with women. He wasn't. There were more than a few who transferred out of his area or specifically asked not to work directly with him. A couple of them said he just creeped them out and let his touch linger longer than was polite. He was just another dirtbag to me. One of those guys that never did anything unless the boss was around. He liked to be the one at company meetings who told everyone to be quiet and listen up, even though it was already quiet. Obviously, anything to do with children, much worse of a crime. But it is still criminal to be one of those people who tells everyone to quiet down and to settle down or whatever when it's already quiet. You're impressing no one, Dale. No one. Story 20. Well, he, 40s at the time, wasn't on the show, but he was busted in a police sting. Thought he was meeting a 14-year-old girl at a park, and he had a bag of lingerie for her. He had been chatting online with an officer posing as the 14-year-old. Creepy stuff. Anyway, he was part of my friend group at the time. I wasn't super close with him, but I'd spent some time around him in a pretty normal group activity setting. He was a bit weird, but most of our group was, so he didn't really stand out. He would make some pretty odd comments about women at times, especially younger women, and he would usually get mocked for it. But I don't think any of us thought he would do anything like he did. He was married happily to the best of my knowledge and had a really good government job. When news reached our friend group, it was a pretty big shock to us all, but it definitely brought to mind some of the weird stuff he used to say. Pretty sure everyone pretty much immediately blocked him on social media. I don't know how much time he spent in jail, if any. I know he lost his wife and job, though. Last I heard, he had moved across the country. He doesn't come up in conversation much anymore, but anytime he does, we refer to him as Child Toucher Bob. Story 21. Well, I know or knew someone who's probably going to end up on that show at some point. We became friends in high school because neither one of us could date anyone. Then eventually we finally got lucky. We both broke up with our significant others once we graduated. I took some time off to focus on myself, and he took some time off to, help out this one freshman to learn how to drive. The last I heard, he was 22 and officially dating a 15-year-old. while helping various others who were a hell of a lot younger than her. I reported him, but this is the same school who forgave a teacher after he invited a student to his house, where him and his old college buddies drugged her and assaulted her. So I doubt anything is going to come of it. But the good news is this is gun-loving, Bible-thumping, redneck country. So if he screws up, it will most likely be his last screw-up. Edit. The girl's parents pressed charges. Basically, the ones who didn't have a problem with what happened was the school. Getting a teacher to move out into the middle of nowhere was one of the main reasons they didn't fire him, because then they would have to drop a crap ton of classes and hire someone else, which they really didn't want to do. He did go to prison, but I'm not sure for how long. I'm sorry. Is there no law or rules in the States if you are charged with an intimate crime, especially involving a younger person, that you cannot work with children? How is this? I don't understand. If he did jail time, he got convicted. So he's on a registry. Also, to be fair, for that crime, I don't think he should have gotten out of jail personally, but I don't make the law. This one kind of just pisses me off, to be honest, so I'm going to move on. Story 22. None on the show, but a lot of questionable teachers when I was growing up. When my parents first moved us out of a really bad neighborhood, we thought things would be better. No. Not only did my 5th grade teacher hate male students, he would rub their shoulders and just get lower and lower down the front. He would have them rub his shoulders and feet too, frickin' creep. He was arrested a couple years later. My health teacher in high school was busted with child content on his work computer. Later, his friend, who was the PE teacher, was caught with pictures of naked gym students on his computer too. This next one was in a gray area. The student was held back a year in elementary or something like that, so by the time she was a senior, she was 18. And this was the teacher's first year working at the district, so there would be no way they knew each other when she was a minor. He was young too, mid-24 or something, and after they graduated, they started dating. The district didn't like the idea of a high school teacher dating an ex-student of his, so they fired him. That was 10 years ago, and they're married with 2 kids. Okay, so the last one, more of a gray area, sure. I still think that the district was right to fire him. I feel like in a setting where you are teaching someone, and also 6 years older, at that point in your life is still significant. It's questionable at best and predatory at worst. I understand if other people have different opinions about this, but this is mine. Don't think you should do that. Story 23. A 50-ish professor at the university that I work at got caught in a sting trying to meet an underage boy to assault him in a parking lot. I was watching the news in bed with my wife, and when his mugshot appeared, I startled the crap out of her by shouting, "Yes!" and jumping out of the bed. The guy was just a complete jerk. I was 25 or so at the time, working as the web guy in the marketing department. I had just recently had a meeting with him and his department to demo their newly redesigned department website. They, the art/design department, didn't like the new website because it actually followed university standards, used approved colors and fonts, had the required university header, etc. They wanted to keep their dumpster fire of a website that broke every rule and looked incredibly unprofessional. When I refused to back down and explained that part of my job was ensuring that all department websites met the standards which had been mandated by the president and board of directors, this jerk erupted at me. He started yelling at the top of his lungs about how I'm not a designer and had no business telling them what to do. I was just a couple of years out of college getting berated and insulted by a tenured department chair. I was incredibly intimidated and couldn't stop my damn body from shaking. But since it was literally my job to enforce the rules, I stood my ground. He stormed out of the room. Despite my best efforts to keep my composure, I found myself wiping angry tears from my eyes. A couple of his colleagues tried to apologize for him, but I knew that if I stayed in that room any longer, I was gonna lose it. So I quickly got out of there without making eye contact with anyone. Just a couple of weeks later, his mugshot was on the news, and I was jumping for joy in front of my very puzzled wife. It is strangely nice when someone you don't like or someone who has done something mean to you turns out to be a terrible, awful, garbage person. It's very vindicating, isn't it? OP, I'm glad you got that vindication, and I'm also glad this guy got caught. What a piece of garbage for more reasons than one. Story 24. I worked with a guy who was eventually convicted of assaulting his girlfriend's kid over a period of 8 years. I would have known him while this was just getting started. Apparently the guy ran in some kid toucher circles online and was recognized when another guy got busted with some of the videos my colleague had filmed. Frickin' disgusting. I was appalled when I found out, but it honestly pieces together pretty well. Dude is a chubby, quiet, awkward nerd with a Disney obsession, and enough tech savviness to think he could get away with something like this. Good at his job, though. I liked him and was a reference for him a couple of times. Bothers me quite a bit to think about how close I was to this creep. I feel like I have to come to the defense of chubby, quiet nerds. Although I understand if someone is like, yeah, that makes sense, in retrospect, please do not assume chubby, quiet nerds are all, strange in that way. Am I just defending what might be my future self? Maybe. But seriously, this seems like some weird confirmation bias stuff. The Disney obsession, I'm not even going to touch on though. I know everyone has their own opinions about that are set in stone, so there's no point in even talking about it. But like, a chubby, quiet nerd does not have to like children too much. You know what I mean. Story 25. I have the unfortunate experience of knowing a man who wasn't on the show but had spent nearly a decade in prison after he assaulted his daughter and had child content. I didn't know him before, only afterwards, and he's a jerk. He acts like he's the smartest person on earth, loves Trump, spends 100% of his free time on his computer where several girls in countries where the age of consent is much lower or non-existent are in contact with him. He has a girlfriend who is 42 years younger than him. She would be about to age out for him, since she's almost 21. They've been together for a few years, but she looks 12 and has the smallest feet and hands you've ever seen on an adult. Literally US size 5 women's shoes are too big on her. She baby talks to him and they roleplay as grandpa, granddaughter as foreplay. I hate that I know this. And the guy treats everyone as if they're stupid. He is the biggest male Karen in history. He causes a scene everywhere by yelling at retail workers and demanding a manager, then acting like they're both so far beneath him. I don't know if this was a warning sign or not, but his ex-wife is basically child-sized at 4'9". Oh boy. There's a lot to process here. Assaulting his daughter, having child content, the fact that that only got him a decade in prison, that's pretty aggravating. That makes me really upset. Acting like you're the smartest person on earth after being arrested? How did a decade in prison not humble him at least a little? That is honestly just somewhat impressive. That level of arrogant ego. I don't know this guy, and I can confidently say I hate him already. I usually don't say that about people, but this guy, yeah. Story 26. Not on to catch a predator, but I had a youth hockey coach who I always thought was a really nice guy. I was like 14 at the time, but he would always call me after games and give me tips and pointers, and I never found it weird. Just figured he was a good guy doing something for kids. He didn't have any children though. 20 years or so later, I see him at a rink. To my surprise, he remembers me. We talk for half an hour. He asks me about my parents. I show him pictures of my family. He starts telling me about this girl that he coached since she was 10 on a girls' hockey team who is now in college playing for a very good school. I'll be honest, I didn't think anything of it. Anyway, we go our separate ways, but do exchange phone numbers. I go home and tell my wife that I saw my old hockey coach and I'd like to invite him over for a cookout. I figured I'd call him over the weekend. Literally the next day, he gets arrested trying to meet up with a 13-year-old girl in a chat room that was really the state police. I never invited him. Well, this isn't the context it's usually used in, but OP, you kinda dodged a bullet. Getting closer with this person seems to be not in your best interest. The universe, and really the state police, did you a solid here. This is just one of those ones that I guess you would describe as you couldn't tell. Just seemed like any other person. And yet behind closed doors was talking with someone who he thought was a 13-year-old girl to meet up. Disgusting. Working with children too. Ugh. Anyway, that is all the stories we have for today. There were plenty of really gross, awful ones in here, so you're welcome, I guess. These people really are just the dregs of humanity, but at the very least, the stories about them are a little therapeutic. The stories where they get caught, at least. To Catch Predator? Great show, by the way. It is just kind of awesome to watch these people get what they deserve. And what they deserve, by the way, is punishment. And it is a little tough for me because I like to think of myself as an empathetic guy. And in a lot of cases, I am definitely reform over punishment. Or like a mixture of the two, right? But reform in these cases is often very difficult from my understanding, if even possible at all. The circumstances surrounding their preferences would have to be a little specific to be able to be fixed, for lack of a better term, which is unfortunate because I do like to believe in the best in people, but people with preferences for children are not the best of people. An unfortunate reality that I kind of just have to face, I think. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.